Thank you, Provost Boyce, for your wonderful and insightful remarks. It is my pleasure to moderate our first panel titled Higher Education and Innovation for Innovation. My name is Takatoshi Ito, and I'm a professor at SIPA, but previously I was the professor at the University of Tokyo. Actually, I negotiated this dual degree program between Graduate School of Public Policy, University of Tokyo, and SIPA. So I spent about 20-some years in Japanese universities and another 20-some years in US universities. And based on my personal experience that I'm very much convinced that Japanese universities need serious reforms to regain relevance as a source of innovation in Japan. And lack of innovation in Japan has made Japanese wages to stagnate and resulted in scarcity of unicorns in Japan. And there are several evidences, and often cited is that top-ranked Japanese universities are slipping in the global ranking. And I do not want to mention the names, but University of Tokyo and Kyoto University, those are two universities in top 200 in one of the global rankings, and trend is not good for those universities. Other symptoms of lack of innovation in Japan include the failure to develop made-in-Japan COVID vaccines, and the recent abandonment of commercial jetliner development program, and the reliance of Taiwanese companies to manufacture state-of-the-art semiconductor factory. So many observers and professionals point fingers to slow changes among Japanese universities as a root cause of these problems or symptoms of problems. And technological progress in AI, fintech, computer science, and others that Mary pointed out that Colombia has it, is so fast that rigid allocation of students to departments and measures in Japanese universities hampers training for students in needed disciplines. And among the US universities, as Mary mentioned, that computer science has grown into a top-ranked measure as students' demand, which is a reflection of the shifting demand in the society. But in Japan, those measures and the department, the students' allocation are governed by the Minister of Education, and they have to choose those measures at the time of the entrance exam, 18 years old. And I think that contributes to a slow change in the Japanese university in response to the society's demand and the students' demand. Most Japanese research universities are public or national universities, and they are subject to stricter regulations set by the Ministry of Education, and traditionally faculty salaries are set by age, regardless of discipline, and publications make little difference in salaries as an incentive. Tuition is low compared to the United States. And for example, the tuition of Columbia universities is about 17 times that of the University of Tokyo. And
we're not proud of that.
And I will not mention about the difference between faculty salaries between Columbia and University of Tokyo. I'd like to welcome the panelists to give their perspectives on the success and challenges of the Japanese and American universities. I'd be very happy if we can find in panel discussion some clues on what kind of reforms are needed for Japanese universities, and in order to take them to source of innovation in Japanese society. I will briefly introduce each of the panelists and what they will discuss, but you can also read more about them in the conference booklet you have. First, we have Professor Teruo Fujii, President of the University of Tokyo, and he is also a part-time executive member of Council of Science, Technology, and Innovation at the Cabinet Office of the Government of Japan. He was previously Executive Vice President in charge of finance and external relations for the university, and he was in charge of the developing a relationship between the New York office and university. He also served as the University Director General of the Institute of Industrial Science. His research specializes in applied microfluidics systems and underwater technology. Next, we have Miguel Urquiola, Dean of Social Science and Professor of Economics at Columbia University. Outside Columbia, he is a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research, and he has chaired Columbia Department of Economics and its Committee on the Economics of Education. His research focuses on the economics of education, how schools and universities compete, and how educational market differ from other markets in economist study. And he has a wonderful book on how the American universities became world-class, top-class research universities in 300 years. And will certainly benefit from his insights and knowledge of the history. And of course, Mary will also join our panel discussion. And I'd like to start with the initial remarks of a panelist, except Provost Boyce, which has just delivered the keynote speech. So let's start from President Fujii, and the podium is yours.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm Teruo Fujii, President of the University of Tokyo. First, I'd like to thank the organizers for giving us this chance. It's a great honor and a great pleasure to join here as one of the panelists, and also especially Ito Sensei for inviting me here. So I just briefly introduce what's going on or what we are doing in terms of the new ways of higher education in the age of this great transformation. So the transformation includes all these different global issues that we are facing now. And first of all, what we thought, or what I thought when I started, when I took the office of the president, and then the world situation was like, so we feel like economic and materialistic development alone is not really enough to increase human prosperity and also well-being itself. And so in this kind of situation, what's the role of the university? So that is the kind of important issue that I needed to think about. And during that time, we talk intensively or discuss intensively about the new guiding principle of the University of Tokyo. And then, so we released in year 2021 in September, so U-Tokyo Compass, which is a kind of new guiding principle in my office. And so the title is Into a Sea of Diversity, Creating the Future Through Dialogue. So we basically set these three core values, as you see on the slide. So first one is a dialogue. So we are, the university is the place where we create new knowledge. And then through dialogue internally and also as well as the dialogue with the people outside. So we will need to share our knowledge, create it, and also even we could co-create knowledge. And that is one very important practice of the university. And then through such kind of dialogue, if we could come up with, for example, new clues or milestones to be able to overcome such a difficult problem that we face. And that is one of the ways for our university to serve the global public. So that is what we thought. And through this kind of process, it is also very important to think about to appreciate the diversity and inclusion. So the the dialogue with people with diverse backgrounds and also discussion from the diverse viewpoints are very important for us to achieve a higher level of academic achievement, to reach higher level of academic achievement, as well as also to come up with a kind of solution to the kind of social issues, to have a kind of common, with a common agreement. So in that sense, diversity inclusion is another very important value that we need to appreciate. And then through these thoughts, so we also want, of course, to make our university a better place where anyone in the world would like to join. So that is a kind of very basic concept of this U-Tokyo Compass. And then based on this guiding principle, we are doing so many different types of activities for higher education. And then today, I would like to raise a couple of backgrounds that I meant by the great transformations. So the first one is increase in the data traffic in society, as well as also all this introduction of the digital technologies into our daily life or daily operation in business. And as you see here, so this is showing the internet traffic, and then it is already doubled before and after COVID-19. So it's from the 1.5 gigabit per second to, 15 terabit per second to 30 terabit per second already. So it's doubled already in 3 years or so. And that means also that we need to see the change of the paradigm from the kind of the source of the values used to be a product or a goods, like a product produced, manufactured by the, for example, the heavy industries or automobile companies and so on. But then now the paradigm itself is gradually shifting into a data or service or those kind of experience itself. And the goods are more like the tools to connect ourselves to such kind of data or experience or service or whatever. So then in this kind of change or transformation, so we will also need to think about how to achieve the kind of necessary expertise. And so we basically need to escape from the kind of old model, old linear model that you see in the left-hand side. So from education and work and retirement. So that you will need to have some chance to reskill yourself or doing some lifelong learning, having some lifelong learning opportunities. And for that, for example, U-Tokyo established a kind of subsidiary company which is providing the data science education. And that is, in fact, located very close to here in Otemachi building, and which is called U-Tokyo. The name of the company is U-Tokyo Extension. And we are running this data science school. And the number of students are doubling every year. And now it's over 1,000 students are taking these courses. And another aspect we need to be aware is the importance of this design art or liberal arts side of those kind of areas of the expertise. besides the STEM area. So it's not only for data or technology, but then you will need to see the kind of all this background information behind all these data. So and then so this is in order to think about applying all these technologies into the society, then so we will definitely need those types of education, and especially for all these. Currently, there are so many discussions around over the generative AI or those kind of things. But in that aspect, we also will need to think about the background information behind all these data. So, and for such kind of purposes, we also this is also a lifelong learning type of activity. But we are offering a design academy in the Toranomon area, which is in collaboration with the Mori Building and Mori Memorial Foundation, together with Royal College of Art. And so this is more for the people from the company, but they are taking courses in the city center area to be able to learn about all this design thinking and also creativity through this academy, through these classes given by the academy. And this is I'm just wanted to show that I just touched upon the topic of ChatGPT or generative AI. So we discuss about the education in the robotics and AI era, and then with this is 18th president of at the time of the 18th president of MIT inauguration. But this is the President Aoun of the Northeastern University. But he already wrote a book called Robot Proof. And then he was talking about the importance of creativity and experience, or the learning by experience for the higher education in this kind of digital era. And in that era, so all this, routine type of process will be replaced by the machines, but we will need to educate the students in the sense of those creativity and also real world experience. And for that, so I'm always talking to the people that it's so important to reconnect our learning to society. So for the student to be able to have some more experience in a real situation in business or in the regional areas or in international side and so on. So I'm going a little fast. And for the, of course, for cutting edge technology is also another very important areas in terms of this digital transformation process. And then, so we are, as Tokyo, we are basically make a kind of strategic alliance with, for example, TSMC for the cutting edge semiconductor technologies, which was in November 2019. And also we set up the collaboration with IBM, and that is also December 2019. And we, in fact, installed the real machine of the quantum computer in 2021 in Kawasaki area, of the first machine ever outside, or second machine ever outside the US, after Germany. And so this is, in fact, the outcomes from the G7 summit meeting. And we signed a new agreement with IBM and also Google, having those $100 million US and $50 million US for coming 10 years. But it's, unfortunately, it is not with Columbia University, but with University of Chicago. But so we are working on this quantum technologies for over next 10 years together with a US institution. So this kind of strategic collaboration with industry is very important for us, and especially for the large scale and the organization to organization collaboration. And for that, we, for example, do the most recent one is the one with Mitsubishi Estate. But also, so we do that with Daikin, Hitachi, or SoftBank, or all these companies. And so I just would like to show you one of the example with the collaboration with Daikin. So, the Daikin is an air conditioning company selling air conditioners. And so under the umbrella of this holistic collaboration, we could design very much flexibly, like doing collaborative research or welcoming many of the engineers from Daikin Corporation to the University of Tokyo to have a look at what's going on in the lab. And also we are even sending our students to their overseas sites for their so-called global internship program and so on. So that what is nice is for the faculty members and also for the students to tackle onto the kind of issues that we are sharing with the company. In this case, it's valuing air. So to think about how to make a kind of high value of the air itself. But that involves many different types of expertise, not only from engineering or science, but also from humanities or social sciences and so on. And so we could even jointly working on the startup support in Africa together with Daikin Corporation. So in collaboration with Washa, which is one of the our UTokyo startups, but they are jointly invested or founded this Baridi, which is kind of the new company for the subscription of the air conditioning machines in Africa. So that is one of the very, unique collaboration in terms of under this holistic umbrella. So startup is also another priority area of ours, and as we saw in the Provost Boyce's presentation, but we are also having around close to 500 startups coming out from our university, and every year normally like 30, 40 startups are founded. And that is due to the kind of startup ecosystem that we organized already from the year 2000 or before year 2000. So technology licensing office is before 1998. And so we have two different types of investment subsidiaries. And one is running two different funds, like a 25 billion yen scale. And also another one is running 85 billion yen scale fund. And so that currently we are looking at the three directions for startups. And one is a globalization. The other one is a deep tech entrepreneurial activities. Another one is a non-profit and social entrepreneurship. Going faster, but then, then one of the globalization activities, so we also went over to Boston, Cambridge this spring, and to organize a seminar to be able to present some of our activities together with our investment subsidiary, which is called UTokyo IPC. And so we made a kind of visit to Broad Institute and Moderna, those kind of places. So I just wanted to react to the Ito Sensei's pitch, and so we in fact also hosting the kind of flagship center for the vaccine development in Japan, which is called the Utopia Center, where we basically recruit Professor Kaoka from the US. And so the idea is to basically find seeds for the next or future vaccines, and also to react in terms of this 100 days mission for when the new outbreak is coming out. And so this is almost the last slide. So one of the reasons why the vaccine in Japan was not successfully developed is also due to the inflexibility of the funding in the university or finance in the university. So this is, I'm always citing this story. So this story is I heard from the president, former president of the Oxford University, Louise Richardson, so who is now at the Carnegie Corporation. Right. She talked about the whole story of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine development. At the time of the breakout came, it's year 2020. And then in January 10 or 11th, right after the sequence from the Wuhan strain is released, and then all the vaccine development team, which is headed by the Professor Andrew Powell, came to her that they want to, so they say that they want to develop a new vaccine for COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2. Then she could say yes. So that is due to the kind of, so they raised like a huge amount of, fund throughout the maybe several years at that time, so that they have a kind of multi-million or tens of millions of US dollars for to be used for vaccine development immediately. So that is such kind of amount should be prepared for the kind of initial investment for as a university. But then, so she said that is mostly for creating space. So the creating space for the scientists to be able to react in such kind of situation is very important to be able to make this kind of very important role, pursue this kind of important role of the university. And that was leading to the kind of COVAX facility, providing them like 3 billion doses or more throughout maybe in a couple of years and without any profit. So that is a kind of also very important deal of theirs with AstraZeneca. So that is the one, idea, how much important that the university should has a kind of free to use money. And also university has a kind of flexibility in terms of its finance. Okay, so I skip all these things. So so as a university, we are, as I have said, we are appreciating all this dialogue with the people outside. And so this is also the very nice opportunity for us to discuss all about the higher education for innovation. And so this dialogue is not only with the people in Japan, but also in the international sites, and also with the industry, and also with the regions, and so on. Okay, so I'll stop here. And so this is a very basic concept of our new guiding principle, Utopia Compass. Thank you so much for your attention.
Okay, so I'll get started. Thanks so much for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to change gears a little bit, and a lot of the conversation has been about the future and what a university should look like. I'm going to talk a bit more about the past. I share with everyone up here and around the room the sense that universities are a key part of society, basically, and a key part of making a strong economy and a strong country. And one question is, how does that come about? So I've done some work on historical university research performance, and research in particular being the focus. And in order to look at this, actually, there's plenty of data since the 1970s. There's lots of recent data, but there's much less before then. So in some work I've done, which Taka mentioned, basically, I used Nobel Prizes to develop a measure of sort of research productivity at universities, or research intensity at universities. And this is a very simple measure. It basically looks at all the biographies of basically Nobel Prize winners, and each time that a university appears in that biography, it gets a mention. So this is not about where Nobel Prize winners are from. It's not like national identity. It's more, if you were a student or a professor or a visitor at a university, that university gets a mention. Okay, so it doesn't matter whether you're basically like a professor or a student. This yields an imperfect measure of research output at universities that goes back into the 1800s. So here I basically wanted to look at what makes university system strong and how can we measure that. So here is the rank of the 5 countries that have the most mentions in this data. So the US is at the top, then comes the UK, then Germany, France, and then Japan. So these are the top 5 performers. Okay? Of course, I created this measure to sort of have a historical sense of how things go. And so here is a graph that looks at how these 5 countries, the top 5 performers cumulatively over time, look at since about 1875 to about 2000. And so here is just time, and on the y-axis there you have the share of Nobel mentions going to to universities in these 5 countries. Okay, and so this is an interesting graph. I must think so, since I've written about it. And what is interesting in this graph? Well, there's a couple of things that are interesting. So one is that basically Germany and France, if you look around 1880, let's say, were at the tippy top. They were the top performers and have gone down since then. So that's interesting. Another thing that's interesting is if you look at basically Japan, which I've highlighted in red there because it's at the bottom and easy to mix with the other countries, and the US, which is at the top. If you go back far enough, around 1880, both were relative to this very elite group underperformers. So if you basically go to around the Civil War or the start of the Meiji period here in basically Japan, both were at the bottom of this super competitive this super elite global ranking. And so way to the left, you see that the US and basically Japan look similar, and then they completely separate. So the US did extremely well and came to dominate this measure of research performance, and Japan did not. It still does in the top 5, but it basically had a very different trajectory, and the question might be why that happened, and if we can understand that, sort of how is it that we could have countries, or that we might suggest reforms, as Taka mentioned, that basically make a country's university system stronger. So let me summarize how I see this. If you ask why did the US lead, I know some things about the US research universities. I definitely will not claim to know much about the Japanese ones. How did it lead? It basically developed a market-oriented system. Okay, now this is not the only way to do 2 things, but it is one way to have 2 features. Markets amplify 2 things. One is they amplify differentiation between schools. So one thing that the US is not afraid of is to have different types of universities. That is to have universities that are very prestigious, let's say, and very focused on research, that charge a lot of money, as Taka mentioned, that basically have different roles, right? 4-year schools. It's also not very concerned about having schools that are different, that only give 2-year degrees or that are much less resourced. So one feature about the US is basically there's a lot of differentiation, a lot of variety in institutional type, so to speak. Other countries, I think, have less of that. For example, European countries are much more of the model. Germany might be one example, that a university should look like this, and it should be equally resourced, and there should not be that much variation. The other feature that a market amplifies is variation in which I'll call school or university reputation, which is simply to say there's some schools that have a lot of prestige and some schools that have less, and within classes, schools will be known for X and another school will be known for Y, and so on. And one thing that happened in the US and that happens elsewhere is that for some schools, research influences their reputation. As Mary mentioned, basically there's a set of schools that when you ask them why are you good, they'll say, well, I'm good because I have good researchers. And so what the US system also did is it didn't exist at the beginning of that period. It developed a system to basically measure research performance. So one thing that happens at universities like Columbia, for example, is that people have to get tenure, which is a long-term contract as a professor with the university. The provost of the university typically, and certainly in the case of Columbia Mary, basically gets to decide, or ultimately is the final decision point that says this person should be tenured or not at Columbia, this person should be a permanent employee or not. And that is based on measures of research performance. These are imperfect, but that's what we have, and this is how the university tries to choose faculty. And as Taka mentioned, the pay at the university is often set on that basis. So one role I have as Dean of Social Science, I don't get to decide the tenure decision, but I do get to have an influence in setting salaries, and the salaries, as Taka mentioned exactly, are set based on some type of basically performance in research. Why is this? Because Columbia feels that it's competing with a set of schools where this matters. And once again, there's differentiation between schools. Other schools do not feel that, and they might pay on a different basis. So these are the two things that basically make the US system peculiar, I think, and that I would argue, I argue actually, help to explain why the US research performance kind of went up. This is the summary. Does this have big implications for other countries? In my humble opinion, yes. This doesn't mean that every country should have a market system that governs schools. That would be hard to achieve in many countries. But there's different ways of basically achieving these two features. It need not be giving the market free rein. So that's kind of the summary. Let me use my remaining minutes to go into a little bit more detail of how this happened. How many minutes? Okay. So initially, this is, so as I said, the US was initially a weak researcher, a weak university research system. Initially, the US system was modeled on the European system. So if you ask people at Harvard, for example, what are you about? They would say, well, we are modeled after Cambridge, and so on, okay? Yeah, you ask people at William and Mary, they would say, well, we're modeled after Oxford. Now, so that's true. However, if we look at Europe now, it's a largely centralized state-controlled university system. So what happened? Why does the U.S. look so different? If we look at the history, actually Europe also had a very decentralized university system initially, but this ended with a Protestant Reformation. That is basically, as there was religious disagreement in Europe, it became very important for the state to control schools and universities, and so the state basically took over schools. By contrast, the US, as we all know, is a very heterogeneous country, and it included a lot of religious heterogeneity, basically different denominations, different religious groups, and each of these groups started to open schools, and so the idea was, well, anyone can open a school and then it must survive. This in the US led to what economists call basically massive entry. In 1776, the US had 9 colleges, and by 1860, that period where my graph began, it had, more than 900 new ones had opened, basically, just a lot of schools. The colleges were small, they were poor, they taught a very basic curriculum, they were weak at research. So if you go back to 1875, let's say, you find that the US colleges were not very good at research, and in fact, the university system was relatively weak, say, to Europe. Then, as we go on, differentiation began. And it actually began by new schools opening. So 2 very important schools in the US are Cornell, one which is part of the Ivy League, even though it's a later school, and Johns Hopkins. And these were schools that basically brought an innovation to the table and said, why don't we teach specialized knowledge, Cornell, and Johns Hopkins, why don't, for the first time in the US, we try to do some research and be at the cutting edge, basically trying to be like a German university. And then schools, 2 very important ones are Harvard and basically Columbia. Old schools responded to this by investing heavily into advanced and specialized instruction and by trying to start also to do some research. So here you have the beginning where 4 schools start to say, let's try to base our reputation and base our prestige on doing some research, and then it's basically off to the races. So a couple of things happened. This led to a differentiation in reputation. So initially, like, there were 900 colleges in the US, all very similar, all very small, all very poor. In this period, a big stage of differentiation began. So you start to basically have some schools that claim to be research-oriented. Columbia would be among them, of course. And then there's also a rise of selective admission. So gradually you see schools following the University of Tokyo model, so to speak, and saying we are going to select students very carefully. So this starts in this period. There is also a differentiation that starts in this period in resources. So some schools, and I emphasize some because this is not true of all schools in the US, gained access to enormous resources. That is, as they get better, they start to charge a lot of money, so you get this huge variation in basically tuition. And the fact that Columbia Columbia now can charge as much as it does. They also get access to donations, and as Mary emphasized very importantly, they get access to federal funding. And one key thing about the federal research funding in the US is that it has been plentiful. We hope it would be more plentiful, but also it is basically allocated competitively. So you see some schools start to get that, and that basically gives differentiation in resources. So differentiation in reputation and in resources. And then some schools have the means and the motivation to measure and to fund research, as I said. So some schools get the means to measure research performance, and this is a whole investment that a system and a country makes. So if you go back to, say, 1875, the US had no academic journals. There was no way to measure who was doing good research. And in this period, starting around 1860, the whole system comes up of basically getting the academic journals and measures that Mary uses to decide who is going to get tenure. And then we see features of the university contracts or labor contract going on, such as the appearance of tenure. So this is a process that basically goes on. Interestingly, it was not a process that any particular agent designed, but that the market kind of induced. And I said it's not the only way of getting such a system, but this is how it happened in the case of the US. Implications, let me close with this slide. As I mentioned, if I were to look at the experience of the US and seeing what does it say for what could help the performance of other university systems, one is the US system allows for differentiation between schools. As I said, to not be afraid of large variation in prestige, price, and mission and market and sort of research orientation, to allow that differentiation to happen. And second, to also allow variation in school reputation. That is, some schools' reputation will vary with research, and to allow these schools to have the means, that is, for example, to be able to charge more tuition, to be able to look for more funding, and the incentives to measure and to pay for research performance. These are the two features that I would highlight. In the US, they developed for kind of historical and market-oriented reasons. These can develop for other reasons too. There are other countries in the world that have these features to different extents. I would say less than the US typically, but that have developed them in different ways. And from looking at work on the economics of education, my guess would be that these features basically tend to help research performance. Let me stop there. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Miguel. So I'd like to start with Mary on how do you see the situation in University of Tokyo and historical accounts, and my remark, which was maybe too harsh on Japanese universities.
Yeah, I thought you were a little bit harsh on the Japanese universities. But I'd like to start by first asking Miguel a question, because you didn't comment on the role of immigration. And in the U.S., I think one thing that does propel excellence is that we have, students from around the world coming to the top universities. And I think if you were to look at your Nobel laureate graph, that those were not, that many of those Nobel laureates came to the U.S. from another country. At some point in their life. It might have been in high school, it might have been in college, it might have been in graduate school. And I think this sense of how, I think President Fujii also commented on how bringing perspectives from around the world together can really fuel creative thought. So could you comment, was there any role of that in that U.S. graph, which is the first time I've seen it? I have to read your book now, so thank you for prompting me in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point and a very good question. You're absolutely right. So I think that the argument I've made is a little bit different in the sense that when people ask why does the U.S. perform well, there is a common answer to that question, why is the U.S. university system good? And very common by very knowledgeable people that basically leads, answers with migration. And in fact, there's a highlight of a particular type of migration, which is, the German decline, which is people leaving Germany, for example, salient Jewish academics leaving Germany and going to the U.S. And I think that's a big issue, and certainly one of the things that makes the U.S. good is its ability, at the university level, is its ability to attract talent. And as you well mentioned, that talent comes from immigrants, it comes from people who come at all periods of their life. The point I make is that, using those data, is that my reading, and this is not an original necessarily point in the sense that other people have observed this, but I think it's a minority point, is that the U.S. was actually ahead of Europe before this migration, that it was already moving ahead, and so that therefore one must look at what is the institutional features that make it start to move ahead. And I would say, if you're an immigrant and you're smart, there's lots of places you can go, right? If you can get a job as a professor or as a good PhD student. So that the question we have to answer is, why is the U.S. attractive? And I think, for example, that by the time World War II started coming around in the 1930s, the U.S. university systems were already working well, and they were able to attract these people. But there's an institutional basis to that. But I fully agree with you that one of the key mistakes, it wasn't like a deliberate mistake, but one of the key problems that the European basically university system had in the 1930s, 40s is, if you're attracting talent, you should ride that, and you should keep it going, and you should make yourself open. This is related to the point of basically diversity. And that the best way to shoot yourself in the foot if you're a university system is basically to repel talent. And so I think that's part of the story. But I think that, so I fully agree that the talent and the immigration are important, but the institutional structure and sort of setup are key also.
So just sort of a summary, these things feed one another,
Correct.
right? If as you start to propel your excellence and gain traction, then you attract greater talent and from many different corners, and then that actually brings more resources because you have greater success, and it keeps skyrocketing.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's virtuous circles, basically.
Yes.
If you do the right thing, it only helps you in this business. Yeah.
And so when we saw this, you've done this in terms of Nobel laureates, but I think you might also think of doing this, and maybe you have, as we think of some of the of changes that President Fujii and I each discussed, is this role of how do we think of translating that student talent into real-world action, but also taking our research scholarship and translating that into products, whatever type of products they may be, if it's physical or digital, that there may be other metrics, because I think that we are seeing the way universities attract and propel talent is also by addressing the challenges facing our world with scholarship, with research, and with translating research. And I think Professor Fujii also discussed that in his remarks about University of Tokyo and beyond. So.
Myself. Okay, so sorry, I thought that you were asking questions.
Well, I'm also asking Miguel, because I'm going to ask Miguel.
Right,
Miguel's going to go home and with homework to do an IP chart over history as well.
Right. Okay. Yes. So so what we are thinking is it used to be like there's a kind of very established career model in Japan, which is like entering into the university, and then they are basically to be hired by the kind of big company or going over to the government, or those kind of typical model existed. But then now when we are looking at the students, so they are like really would like to something, really would like to contribute to the and something good for society, and then not only through those, working in a big company or government, but also by their hand, directly.
By their own idea.
That the idea. So our current idea is to push their back and then promote their a wish for them to make it into reality. So that, and then if that can be, so if they can do it during their time at the university. So then whatever, so it will, so they will, so there's many failures or many, so not only success, so that, but then they can also have an experience for the failures. And then that is also another very important part of the education. So that, so in this way, so we thought it's so important for
and
them
what
to,
about what about the fundamental research and translating that? So we have the student competitions, innovation, and idea generation, but we also have fundamental research that then we translate into, the next way we do computing or the next electric vehicle.
Okay, so then I'm always also talking to them that so you can have a look at both, so that you can do some sort of a startup activities, but also you could stay in the lab and then pursuing your research itself. And then at some point, if you like to do something out of these outcomes of your basic research, that is also that is something also we are helping out. So that so we basically provide them a kind of the various opportunities for them to be able to put their ideas on the market. So that is the basic
are
idea.
you seeing? I'm sorry to.
No, you can take over the moderator.
I can't help myself sometimes. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, so in the U.S., we're seeing the shifts in the government and how they support research. They're still supporting fundamental research, which we value very much. We really are committed in that direction. But they're also introducing new avenues to support taking that research to more rapidly bring it to the marketplace. Are you seeing Japan moving in that direction?
Yes, I think so, yes. So, the government is pushing a lot about all these startup activities, so that, it's, there are many opportunities for also getting government funding for the, for example, PhD students to be able to start up something out of their own research outcomes. So like this way, the government is also.
But I guess I thought a point you were making at the end in defense to Professor Ito's comment was that the UK argument on why why they were able to do the vaccine, as one example, is that they had labs established that they were able to bring people to be ready. And I've heard scientists and biomedical engineers and others from the U.S. saying that the reason, and it wasn't not so much country dependent, but the reason that there was rapid development of vaccine was because we were ready, right? There was fundamental science in a number of different areas that you were sort of positioned. We can take that, but then you needed that space and you needed that money to make it happen. So the sense of how can a country be providing that infrastructure to be ready for that next thing. I thought that was the point you were making.
Okay. Yes, so in that sense, we have a kind of, we have a technology for making the vaccine, but at the same time, we didn't have a kind of the space to do the real thing. So that is my concern.
Right.
So.
Well, actually, there was a researcher at the University of Tokyo who was doing this messenger RNA research and doing animal testing and so on. But a year or two before the COVID started, the funding was cut.
Yes,
that's amazing, right?
Right, exactly. So so when you, for example, when you develop a vaccine, and then for the first and second phase experiment, we will need to have a kind of billion yens. But then when in the regular operation of our budget operation, that it will take time. So that that means that, so it's so difficult to create a space for
Right.
doing that.
So I think, to our government authorities out in the audience, I think a message is the government support that's needed to be ready, to be ready to translate.
Yes.
And also, in the COVID vaccines, we cannot neglect the fact that how important a role established industry played, all right? Because we also need to be ready to scale that and how that interplay can happen. So also the partnerships between research universities and companies also takes on a whole different level of importance in being able to rapidly translate.
Yes.
So, President Fujii, if you are to make 3 wishes that your university wants to have, what would that be?
Okay.
Genie bottle, 3 wishes.
So 3 wishes. So I think the first of all, it's a kind of financial flexibility to be able to, so basically establish our own fund. So not only from the like a donation only, but also from all this the money which is left behind. So if we
Endowment, basically.
kind of endowment kind of system. And also we would like to have some more flexibility for the debt financing. So that's another thing.
You're issuing University of Tokyo bond, right?
Yeah, so we issued a bond, but the purpose for the bond is to be used only for like land or buildings or all these, hardware things. So that, and also we could, we cannot do all this refinancing operation, all those kind of things. So and also we could just cannot, rent some money for the regular operation. So that all this flexibility in debt finance. And also maybe for the flexibility in investment for the specific business or whatever. So like now it is also under control of the law for the national university.
Right, yeah.
So, maybe in terms of financial operations.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, Mary, so Colombia has a huge endowment and which support not only research but also the regular expenses of a university. And how do you see this the flow income like tuitions and endowment returns and federal government subsidies or overhead for the research? How do you see the mix, and do you have also the wishes that how you want to change?
Yeah, so Colombia is fortunate to have a large endowment, but for the scope of activities that go across a university of this size, where we have 17 schools, and undergraduate programs, master's programs, PhD, research, that it actually is not sufficient, right? And so tuition is also a very major source. And you seem to proudly say that we're 17 times higher tuition than University of Tokyo. And it is something I will say, particularly the private universities in the U.S. and the very top ones, it's extremely expensive to support talent, to attract talent, to support talent as undergraduates, as master's students, as PhDs, as faculty, the research labs that are needed, the education facilities. And so, and yes, for the research, we have very, very high levels of support from the government, totally critical, but that actually, I think, needs to accelerate, especially when we have so much opportunity today. We see rapid developments across so many fronts, and just to keep pace with where we could be, right, needs more. And I like how Miguel was saying, when you have those successes, it attracts talent, and that propels talent, it propels greater success. But you need to have the resources to actually support that. And we're in these moments of incredible acceleration in the capabilities that we can bring to so many different fields, whether it's through artificial intelligence and other software and algorithm, or through new materials, new ways of thinking about energy storage and power. That there's so much that we can be doing, but we are all under-resourced. So how do we think of that more collectively? That we want to be able to bring the student talent in, but we also don't want them to pay the tuition that we're having to charge. It's just because so we have our financial aid to bring those students is rising. So this sense of how an endowment helps offset that expense for students and for some aspects of faculty and education and research, it's not nearly enough. And so therefore we have the tuition, we have the government funding, but how do we as a society really come to grips with where we are hoping to be going and what expanded partnerships? I think industry can be stepping up more in this regard. I'm using this as a platform to say that, if that's all right, that industry is relying on the students that are produced and the research that is produced and ideas that are produced from universities. And they're increasingly coming to partnership with universities, and I think they're doing so in bigger ways also because of the rapid translation of that knowledge to impact. So how do we think about this in whole new ways going forward? Because we have to be a collective ecosystem and in partnership across universities, as we're seeing those expanding as well. Because no one university has all the expertise to confront what's happening.
Yeah.
So just the information for Mary and Miguel that Japanese government created a so-called university fund, and they're going to they hired professional portfolio managers, and they will generate returns and distribute to the select 5 or 6 universities, and I'm sure University of Tokyo will get a piece of it. And
also, but we are now in the selection process,
right.
So yeah.
But would that be a game changer for Japanese universities, do you think?
If we could use that, support in the right way, so that should be, that must become a game changer. Okay. So for that part, so for that end, so we need to use that money to establish a kind of new types of, capacity in the university for all this management to be able to, like a form that we are now currently discussing, like a form of the new virtual cycle of the support, and also sort of empathetical, wish right. to the over to the university activities throughout the society. Like you said, that is part of the large ecosystem. Yeah. So so far the university in Japan is not really, good at such kind of activities as a kind of organization, so that we will involve some more expertise from, outside, and also nurture those new capacities internally. So that for this kind of purposes, if we could use that support for this kind of purposes, it will become a game changer. So.
Okay. Yeah. So Miguel, so you emphasize those virtuous cycle that Professor Fujii just mentioned. That you have the reputation, then you get better students, and you get higher research, and you have more reputation. This virtuous cycle. Yeah. So how? 2 questions. One is how that virtuous cycle comes about. What are the triggers to make cycles to go up? And two, what is the role of the state, role of the government in this creating the reputation?
That's a key question. So I think one key part of the virtuous circle is basically selectivity. There be some schools, and just as there are schools in some countries that get onto a virtuous cycle, some, conversely get into a vicious one. So initially you might have two schools which are, fairly similar, and then one starts to get more selective and takes off, and the other one goes down. And I think from the point of view of the system, that's fine. I think that, so selectivity exists in the US, for example. There are some schools that are very selective. Selectivity exists actually in almost every country, right? So there are places that objectively, actually, this may be one. Some schools are more selective than and the same thing goes for European. So I think that one issue there that you raised, Taka, that's very interesting is that what happens next, right? So I think that in the US, what you had is rising selectivity. Then what other ingredients do you need? I think one would be the ability to charge a higher price, as that's good and bad. The ability to receive donations, the ability to manage those donations. And so I think that here's a place where you need several ingredients, and then the ability to attract, and to pay differently, so you attract people from abroad. So I think that lots of countries have one of these ingredients, or two or three, but one thing that the US did, not by design, again, kind of by accident, is to kind of unite them all and then take off. And just to basically emphasize, it also caused in the US some vicious circles, in the sense there were some schools that were perfectly good that many people in this room will not know, but that were just as good as Columbia, and then they went down as Columbia went up, and so on.
So in Japanese case, that one of the most important ingredients is the entrance exam.
Yes.
And how difficult to enter University of Tokyo in entrance exam, which is actually double-blinded grading. And the professors spend so many hours to create problems and grade the entrance exam, which is unheard of in US universities and for undergraduate. So this virtuous cycle is created through the entrance exam, difficulty to enter universities, and that is tied to the reputation, and not necessarily the research capability until recently. I think research has become more increasingly more important in the Japanese university reputations. And so you have to sort of keep both entrance exam and research as a key for the Japanese university's reputation.
That's
or both Professor Fujii and Miguel.
Yeah, okay. Yes, so so entrance exam or the way for the admission is one of the items that we also need to think about. So because so in some sense the entrance exam is a kind of really rigorous paper writing exam. So that is basically to select those students in a kind of one measure. But then when as I have said, when you appreciate all these diverse viewpoints or diverse talents, then so it is not the only way to select those excellent people. So that so in that sense we think that we will need to think about some sort of diversification of the entrance or admission process. That is one thing. And then that is also, as I have said, leading to the kind of diverse viewpoints for at the end, research works or some other activities throughout the university. So that is also, I believe that makes also the activities in the university, richer than present. So that in that sense, to think about that, admission process is very important, even if we think about the research excellence.
You go.
Sure. So I think that this is one of the more difficult areas. And I think in general, selectivity is something that I think is a good attribute for a system to actually have. How to engineer the selectivity, so to speak, is complicated. And so sometimes when there's an exam and only that exam determines admission, this creates, on the one hand, it's very clear and very transparent. On the other hand, it creates sometimes an excessive focus, perhaps on only that exam. The U.S., for various historical reasons, has avoided that. It really is a selective system, but the selective, the selection of the student is a function of many things, for good and for bad, in the sense that it's easy to criticize the American system and how it selects students. But maybe one good attribute is that I have seen significant efforts in South Korea, which has a similar system, to reform in some universities the admissions so that they're a bit more mixed and that there may be different tracks. I think that one of the wish lists that if something could be on the wish list might be also how whether people have some flexibility in choosing which field they go into, and that's also related to the admission process and stuff like this. And the U.S. once again, for sort of historical reasons, mainly admits students without asking them what they will do, and then 1 or 2 years later, the student says, "I want to be a computer scientist or a physicist," and so on.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we'd like to open to the floor. If you have any questions, please raise your hands. And David, you are the first.
Thank you. This was a great session. I want to just talk a little, or ask a question a little bit about the role of the government, because I was kind of struck in difference between President Fujii's speech and Mary's speech. When Mary was talking about government support, she rattled off the names of about 6, if I counted correctly, different government agencies that are funding engineering, ranging from DARPA, NSF, ARPA, ARPA-H, CHIPS Act, and on down the line. And I noticed in President Fujii's speech, he didn't talk about big government support. And then also kind of in Miguel's speech, I also was noticing that government played a relatively small role, but one of the big roles in which government plays in subsidizing universities is through the tax code. So when a donor gives $1 to Colombia, that only reduces their disposable income by around 50 cents. And so part of what, and then to add on to a question for Taka is, despite the National Endowment Fund for Japan of 10 trillion yen approximately, if you look at the endowments of U.S. universities, it's about a little more than 9 times higher than that. And Japan's population is maybe a third that of the U.S. So, even with that, the U.S. has a huge advantage. And I guess part of what I'm trying to understand is, to what extent is American success in funding high-level research due to a government commitment through the tax code, through subsidies, to achieve that goal?
Mary?
So I think it's actually quite critical, the government funding of research. What I also want to say there is it's a highly, highly competitive situation. So there's RFPs, requests for proposals, in certain areas put out, and there's tremendous competition across the U.S. to go after that funding. So there are a lot of great ideas that never get funded because there isn't enough funds for every proposal. But at the same time, there's just immense brain power and creativity going on after an RFP comes out. Across the country, people are thinking, okay, what ideas can I bring to the table? What partners should I bring together? What university do I partner with? What companies do I partner with? Do I partner with the city, the state? What are the big ideas to go after? And I think it generates creativity. that is hard to think of happening in any other way. As a engineering scientist myself, I always thought, oh, it'd be so great if the government would just give me a bunch of money. Why do I have to write a proposal every time? But the proposal writing is a really creative moment. And so I don't think we've mentioned that here, that there's the competition actually can foster creativity. And while we have tremendous funding from the government, one, it's not enough because a lot of ideas don't get funding because there's not enough. But the process of how you get that funding is highly, highly competitive. And I think that that's an important point that we should note, because in some European countries it's not as competitive, right? So there's different countries have different processes, and it's extremely competitive. And I think that there's something of value in that competition.
Miguel?
I fully agree. Yeah, if I can add one thing maybe is that I see two types of, so I think government support is crucial, right? This I think that is quite clear. There's two types of government support that the U.S. does. One is relatively blunt, for example, which is to say everyone will get tax breaks, every university can avail themselves of stuff. Historically, there's been several, some other types of blunt support. For example, the U.S. helped create public universities that compete by doing things like, handing out money from the proceeds of land sales in the Morrill Act, and that was fairly blunt. But a lot of it, as Mary was highlighting, is very targeted in the sense that it spends a lot of money on research, but it is a government support that's substantial and that, as I mentioned, is unafraid of differentiation. So it says, here's a large pot of money. If Johns Hopkins and Berkeley and Columbia win most of it, that's because they came up with better answers to the RFP. That's fine. And so there's both types, and I think that one key thing is to put a lot of money out there. As I mentioned, I think it'd be good actually for the U.S. I think to fund research even more from the government. And that is not to say that it should give Columbia money for free. It basically is enter the competition and see if you can win grants.
Yeah. So we also have a kind of substantial, amount of the subsidy from the government, and which is competitive funds, and almost like 1/3 of our annual budget is from the government. So that is competitive basis, besides the kind of basic subsidy. So that also, so we get it in competition. But so may I ask one question? So that how much, those the university is supporting the researchers to deal with this really highly competitive fund application for those funds. So that is also another very important function of the university as an organization.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, so you'd need a whole management structure there to actually, put the proposal together. The research ideas are coming from the faculty and researchers, but there's a whole management structure and a budget structure for how do you put this together before you even submit a proposal. And then after you get success on managing that and reporting on that. So there is a whole sort of human resources element that's needed to really support that. I wanted to say one more thing related, but sort of on a little bit on the peripheral, is that when we talked about the U.S. government introducing new forms and new agencies on the more translational aspect of research, this is not as top-down as you might think, because what they were seeing is the success at a number of universities of translating research to actual real-world products and scaling it. And so what you're seeing is around the universities, but outside the university, you would have incubators start. So we have a couple of biotech incubators, meaning small areas with the with being ready, with capacity for a few researchers to go out of the lab and start a company, and then to get venture funding, which wasn't mentioned here, to then scale that further. So when the government is seeing those successes, then they act and say, hey, we could amplify this, and I think Miguel used the word amplify a bit. We can amplify this by bringing government funding in to enable that. So there's a feedback loop as to what you're seeing universities sort of naturally what we would call organic growth of new ways of doing things, that then the government can come in and provide more substantial support to make it really happen, and to make that happen not just at University X and University Y, but at University A through Z. So.
Thank you very much, the panelists and audience. And